And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down. Anyone you want.
Fake news.
Fake news.
I've been in situations like that before. I've never really had a mob attack me before.
I think I did say at one point, like, this is my city. Like, I live in this city. And they're like, you're not safe here.
Then I thought about what President Trump tweeted back in December saying, be there, will be wild. For some reason, that tweet kept popping up in my head.
Fitz, you have been inside the Capitol. You were part of
the officer turned to all of us and said, you all need to get into a locked room right now and barricade the doors.
I'm Lindsay Watts, a reporter at Fox 5 in Washington, D.C. This is a podcast about the siege on the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. We were out there covering it as it happened. You'll hear interviews you haven't heard before. We're looking into the police response, the rioters, the lives that were lost after this, and the investigation into how it happened and how the country will change as a result. We start with our own stories from that day, and I want to warn you, some of the audio is offensive and violent. We're used to protests in D.C. They happen all the time, and there have been bigger crowds than the one on January 6th. Thousands of pro-Trump protesters had just been in the city the month before, and everybody knew they planned to come back on the day Congress was certifying electoral votes in the presidential election. It's typically a boring procedural process that draws very little attention. This time was obviously different. There were multiple events happening on that Wednesday. The big one was a rally on the Ellipse, a large park near the White House. President Trump had announced the night before that he would be joining and speaking at 11 a.m. People started lining up before 4 in the morning for that. Fox 5 photographer Doug Wilkes was out there.
It had actually been a pretty cool event. Well, I've got my own political leanings. I don't really care how anybody else leans. You know, my feeling is just vote, and then the winner wins, and that's that. And I know these people were upset because they thought that they should win, but that's not the way it worked out.
What was the vibe at the rally?
At the rally at the Ellipse, we were not taking any heat, and everybody was a Make America Great Again person. And people would stop and talk to us. And there was nothing out of the ordinary.
Here's a father and son from Kentucky who were at that rally.
This is our time to support the country. This is our time to join in the revolution to take our country back and support our president.
We've been censored for too long, and in this way, they can't hide anything, you know.
Media will not show the magnitude of this crowd. Even when I turned on today...
President Trump started speaking around noon. He kept up the lie that the election was stolen from him and that it was rigged. It's the whole reason people had come to D.C. so angry. They believed the election was stolen from them, and they wanted it back.
And show what's really happening out here.
They were clearly very passionate about their stance, and they have a right to be.
Fox 5 reporter Sierra Fox was at the Ellipse with Doug.
And at that same time, though, they were very angry. So there was this sense of a false narrative that was going on. And what stood out to me is that I saw people who were idolizing President Donald Trump like God. There are people with signs that had him in place of Jesus and the Lord.
And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down. Anyone you want, but I think right here, we're going to walk down to the Capitol.
When the speech ended, around 1:15, Sierra and Doug stopped by their car so they could send some video and interviews back to the station. By then, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi had started the joint session that would certify the electoral votes. People at that point had already gathered at the Capitol before the president's speech was even done. And over the next hour, more and more people marched down there. First, they were able to get through the outside perimeters. That was around 1 o'clock. A little over an hour later, they made it through the Capitol doors.
By the glory of God, ladies
we had two security people that were hired to be with us knock on the window and say, hey, there's been a breach, and apparently the crowd has gotten into the Capitol.
Right away, I was like, hey, Doug, we got to go. So we started making our way to the Capitol. And while we were walking down, we actually saw a woman crying. So we stopped her saying, hey, like, are you all right? What happened? She said, I just can't believe people are trying to go into the Capitol right now. That's not what I came here for. This is getting out of hand. Police are throwing tear gas at us. This is crazy. And I was just like, what's going on? And so at that time, I could kind of sense there are two type of Trump supporters that were there. There were some who really did want to peacefully protest, which is what we saw at the Ellipse. But then there's other people who made this turn into a chaotic scene. So we started walking closer to the Capitol, and I was seeing people climb the walls of the Capitol. And people were even using a lifter to go up onto the terrace and to just chant, 4 more years, stop the steal.
You may have watched it all play out on TV. Just total chaos at the U.S. Capitol, one of the most secure buildings on the planet, right? I mean, I think we were all asking, how in the world could this happen? Capitol Police lost control, and I'm sure you've seen the social media videos that seem to show some Capitol Police officers standing by as people walked right in. There are investigations underway now into how some officers behaved that day, but that should not diminish at all what we saw from the majority of police defending the Capitol, who were doing everything they could to fight back that crowd. We saw rioters brutally assaulting officers. The mob mentality was on display inside and out.
I got to say it was very surreal. A guy with a still camera, it didn't necessarily look like he was in the media, the mainstream media or the accredited media, but he walked by us and he said, don't go around to the east side. They're attacking the camera crews, destroying their gear and beating them up. And then he just kept walking, and it was very creepy and ominous, because it really wasn't many minutes after that a couple of guys got right in front of me, and one fellow was flipping the bird and holding it in front of my lens no matter where I turned it. And the other guy said, you have to leave. You're not allowed to be here anymore. And I looked, and they were dressed in like army olive drab stuff, helmet, vest, fatigues. And I said, hey, man, we have as much right to be here as you do. And he said, no, you don't. I'm telling you, you're not allowed to be here. Get out of here. And then this guy next to him started blowing cigarette smoke in my face.
Get out of my country! Get out!
We have video of some of what happened to them.
Fuck it out! No!
And they called my photographer, Doug Wilkes, an a-hole for no reason, and someone even ripped off his mask.
This guy is screaming inches away from Doug's face. You can see people surrounding them, kicking Doug, calling them fake news and traitors.
Get him the fuck out of here then! We don't want him here! Just leave the guy alone.
Sierra just started at Fox 5 a few months before all this happened. She's been reporting for about as long as Trump was in office, 4 years. Doug has been a photographer for 41 years. I hadn't talked to either of them until now about what they experienced. We really don't see that much of each other because most of us aren't going into the station anymore due to COVID. And hearing that someone had pulled off Doug's mask, the first thing I thought about is that he is a cancer survivor. And seeing that video of people in his face was just disgusting.
And I'm just like, I'm not sure quite what to do. Then there was a tug on the back of my camera. Apparently they were trying to pull the cable out of the back of my camera. And that's when from there it was kind of a blur, and it was hard to keep track of exactly what happened. But what I do know is the shoving, somebody slapped my lens very hard, and I spun that back around, and then we were getting pushed, and somebody grabbed the side of my camera, pushed it into my head cocked to the side. The camera went over and landed on the head of one of our security personnel. And I was afraid I had hurt her. I never lost my grip on the camera, but it was there were just so many people pushing and yelling, and it was just hard to know what was going on. I pulled the camera back onto my shoulder, and I know we were getting punched and pushed, and I turned at one point. I could see both security people had people hitting them.
Did you think at any point that you were going to get really hurt?
Was I thinking I was going to get hurt?
Yeah.
In the moment, no. Afterward, absolutely. I realized a couple of hours later that I was actually very scared. I really was. I just didn't know what was going to happen. And it was a very helpless feeling. And then I got angry that I was scared. And it was just a weird feeling. It was, I don't know, I'm glad nothing happened. I've been in situations like that before. I've never really had a mob attack me before. But I've certainly been yelled at. I've been grabbed before and threatened, but I've never been hit. When I got home last night, I saw I had bruises on my leg. On one of my legs, I had bruises all over it. And I can't say I was really hurting that bad, but I just couldn't get over looking back on it and realizing after the fact that I was actually very scared. And I don't know, that made me angry. It made me angry at myself. It made me feel rather something like a wimp. This is not something that I ever feel about I never really fret about what's happening when I'm doing my job. And this time, it really kind of, I'm fine now, but for a couple of days, I was just trying to think it through and trying to remember everything that happened. And I was feeling scared, and that made me angry. And now I'm ready for anything else that comes along. I just feel like I've been there now, and it's not going to be a big deal. So,
you've been doing this a really long time, right?
I really have, and I've been in crowds before, angry crowds. I've been with angry crowds overseas. I was in Baghdad when Herbert Walker Bush was dropping missiles in Baghdad and down in Basra, and I was videotaping that from a rooftop. And that didn't scare me a bit.
Wow.
That's why there was a certain helplessness I felt surrounded by these people, and it was all I could do to stay on my feet.
In the meantime, let's go to Sarah Fox, who was
They were live on TV soon after that.
Complex. Sierra, what are you seeing there, and have things calmed down where you are?
For a moment there before my live shot, I was actually speechless.
Well, Marina, we were closer to the crowd, but we had to step away so we could get a signal.
But of course, we have to report and tell the news and describe what's going on, so I quickly kind of kicked back into gear. But I was shocked, even though this wasn't surprising because there were signs leading up to this. And like I said, I had a tense feeling, and a gut feeling throughout the day. But just seeing it unfold before your eyes and being right there next to a dangerous situation is just totally different.
Inside the Capitol, both the Senate and House had gone into recess. Our political reporter, Tom Fitzgerald, we call him Fitz, he was in there too. Fitz has covered the Capitol for 2 decades, and he was there on Wednesday reporting on the vote certification. He was set up on the House side in the Cannon Building Rotunda.
U.S. Capitol Police officer. He had come to the middle of the floor in the Rotunda, which is this huge 3-story room with a circular dome cap on it. And he started shouting, "Building is being evacuated. building is being evacuated, clear the building now. The building has been breached. So I knew right away. I had been evacuated out of buildings before, so I knew right away we had to take everything we had, which meant all of the equipment had to go, because there was no guarantee that we were going to get back in there. And I expected what was going to happen was that we were going to go, like you would in a fire drill, go outside on the street, and then we would work from outside of the building. But that's not what happened, because when we get downstairs, the Capitol Police were waiting for us, and they kept us away from the doors because they did not want anybody opening any doors, because they were concerned that the protesters were also going to start to flow into the outer congressional office buildings, because they had some members of Congress that were already back in their office, because after 1:15, the House adjourned. So what they did is they sent us into the basement of Cannon. And if you've ever been inside these buildings, they are all connected by a subterranean network of tunnels. Some people online have made some wild claims about these being secret tunnels. There's no secret about them. It's one of the main ways people travel from building to building, and it's great in the winter. It's great when it's raining, because you don't have to go outside and get wet or get snowed on. But in this case, that's where they sent us initially to evacuate.
He was there with other members of the media, some congressional staffers, and even members of Congress.
And they were bringing a group of injured U.S. Capitol Police officers through right where we were standing. So we all backed up against the wall to get out of their way, and they came through almost like a presidential detail with this group. At the time, I thought it was anywhere from 15 to 20 officers. I've now realized it was about 15 officers, and they were walking, but they were not in good shape. They had wounds on their heads. They were bleeding. You could see they had abrasions on their face. One officer I remember looking at, I could see fingerprints on his face, almost as if somebody had grabbed his face and squeezed as hard as they could.
What started that morning as a protest was now a full-on violent riot. Around 2:50, I found out from a source of mine that there had just been a shooting inside the Capitol, and it was bad. Paramedics were doing CPR on the victim.
All we heard over the radio was shots fired on the House floor. And that, hearing shots fired on the House floor, you had to wrap your brain around that for a second.
We learned later the shooting happened just outside the Speaker's lobby. Cell phone video shows a group smashing the glass on the doors. And then a woman is hoisted up. She's trying to climb through a broken window. A Capitol Police officer on the other side of the doors fires a single shot, and she falls to the ground.
Immediately after that, something kind of chilling happened, was that we realized the halls got empty of the police. And what was happening was they kept going to join the fight. And a U.S. Capitol Police officer turned to us who were in the hall, and I actually happened to be with the husband of one of our anchors at Fox 5, Shirin Roger, and the officer turned to all of us and said, "You all need to get into a locked room right now and barricade the doors." Now the question was immediately, okay, where do we go? We tried some doors, and we opened one up, and we realized that there was a utility closet there that was used apparently by electricians from the architect at the Capitol. And we walked in that room. We bolted the door. We found a few packing crates that were inside. We threw those up on top, and then we found a couple of these rolling work toolkits. If you've ever seen, one in a garage where they fix your car, they weigh several hundred pounds and the wheels lock. And so that got thrown up in front of the door. Pallet went on top of that to kind of brace the doorknob. And then we went back into a deeper room, which had another door on it and another lock. And then that's where we hunkered down.
How big was that room?
I would say probably it was long and narrow, probably about 20 feet long, but probably only about 7 feet wide.
Jeez. And how many were in there?
2 of us. We could hear that there were other people in other rooms. That was by about 3 o'clock. So we were evacuated out of Cannon at, I would say, 1:45. By 3 o'clock, we were in full lockdown with the door barricaded. And that's
Our Tom
where we
Fitzgerald
stayed.
has been there along this afternoon. Fitz, give us an update.
I wish I could update you.
Fitz was able to do live shots from there, and so he went on air and started reporting.
But as we discussed in our last conversation, we are amongst the hundreds, tens of hundreds of people right now who are in lockdown inside.
When you're in a situation like that, it's concerning and it's scary. But honestly, my biggest concern was that I knew that we had crews that were out on the street, and I saw how bad it was there, and I was really worried about them.
Photographer Jesse Burkett Hall and reporter Ike Egiachi were on another story and then had to rush to the Capitol. Here's Jesse.
We see people ascending up the wall on rope. And I was like, okay, that's kind of stupid. I mean, there's steps right around the corner. And but we kind of went toward them, Ike and I, and we had not met our security yet. We went toward them, and I just started shooting with my camera, obviously, and took some cell phone footage. Ike was taking some cell phone footage. He even asked one of the guys that was trying to ascend up the wall, what's the purpose of this? And he's like, I don't know. So, and these were mostly, at this time, it looked like it was a kind of a younger crowd. So we were like, okay, this isn't too much. So it still felt pretty safe. So then we kind of walked toward, so we're the north side, we kind of walked toward the east front. And this is the front where, I've always thought of it as where the Marine One comes on Inauguration Day, and you wave goodbye to the old president and you say hello to the new once the inauguration's over. So we go toward that direction, and that's when things started to change.
You sure you don't want to try before we go in there? Meet up with our security?
No, we should.
Huh?
I think we should, bro. I just sensed something. I was like, we really need to find our security. Like, I don't feel safe, which is kind of crazy because I'm covering a ton of stuff and being in this business a while. You feel invincible, and I always feel like the camera's going to protect me. Because nobody's going to harm me because I have this big ass camera on my shoulder.
And video evidence.
Yeah, video evidence. And so we get there, we get to the east front. Ike is like, okay, there's some entryways kind of directly to the side of the steps, to the left and to the right. So we go to the left side and we see people coming out of the Capitol.
Ike took this video that shows not only people walking out of the Capitol celebrating, but also a Capitol police officer helping a rioter out of the door, a rioter who appears to have been pepper sprayed. Someone asks the officer why he pepper sprayed the guy, and the officer says that he didn't. He's trying to help him. And I remember seeing that and asking, wow, I mean, these people had just stormed into the Capitol and now they're just walking away and police are helping them out? That video was far from the most concerning we'd go on to see. At that point, Ike and Jesse had reconvened, but not for long.
We meet up again, and we're like, all right, bro, we really got to find our security. Because he's been on the phone with them, and they're just having a hard time finding us at our location. Because they parked on the opposite side, I think the south side of the Capitol. And then I get a phone call from our boss. So as I'm taking the phone call, that's when it got really scary. So I separated myself because I was taking a phone call from Ike, and I was just crowded around. by a group of people who started shouting down at me.
With those little girl pants on.
I wouldn't tell them who I was from, which may have been in hindsight a mistake. And then it was just really scary. These big white men just surrounding me in my face. I mean, literally in my face, obviously maskless, and just barking orders, barking statements at me, telling me to get out of here. And I think I did say at one point, like, this is my city. Like, I live in this city. And they're like, you're not safe here. And then the guy told me he's going to crack my head open.
Get your fucking heads cracked, you hear me, motherfucker?
Did you think that they would do something to you?
I did if I decide to exchange words with them. I thought if I say something, I am definitely going to get my ass beat. I was frightened. I have never been, in the 12 years I've been in this business, as frightened as I was in that moment. Because I couldn't find Ike. And I was like, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here right now.
I obviously haven't talked to you at all since this happened. I was watching that video you posted back today, just right before I talked to you, to sort of refresh my memory. And it just made me so sad to hear the things that were said to you. And I'm just really sorry that happened.
Oh, I appreciate it. That, I think definitely like the language toward my sexuality, just based off of something I'm wearing, like that my jeans were too tight or something like that, that did bother me. It should bother me. But that annoyed me. That was up there with annoying me the most.
A little more on Jesse and Ike. Jesse has been a photographer for 12 years. He's gay, and he's married to a journalist at another station in town. He and Ike have known each other quite a long time. They worked together in Connecticut before they both came here to D.C. Ike, who is Nigerian, got a new reporting gig elsewhere soon after all this happened. He's been in the business 7 years, and he says this day was the worst he's experienced professionally.
So we locked up with our security. These were two big dudes. I felt pretty safe. And we started. That was a tad bit before 4 o'clock.
How are you out there? Go for it.
All right, listen, it's a little intense right now. I want to show you something right here on the back steps of the Capitol in the middle one.
It was really, really sad. The Capitol is my favorite building in D.C. I know I'm a geek, and I'll say this, but I used to have. I love history. I used to have this Capitol framed, matted picture above my bed up until I left the house as a kid. It's always been majestic to me. There's something about it. I love it. I live close to it now, and I take my dogs up there and I walk, and I walk to the East Front where all this happened a lot. And it was just a lot of things went through my mind. I was like, this building is democracy to me, and it's just the way that these people have trashed it.
About 3.5 hours had passed since people got inside the Capitol. D.C. police were on scene from very early on, trying to help regain control. And by then, the National Guard and police from all across our region were there. They had come in as backup.
We got closer to 5:30-ish. Reinforcement was brought in. MPD was there in large droves, and they started overtaking they started taking the steps again and pushing the rioters back. So we were like, okay, let's. We still have a lot of ways, a lot of TV to do.
A flashbang just went off.
We were right there, and that's when the flashbangs went off. And so one went off, and we were just like, okay, let's just sit here a minute. And the rioters like screaming and everything else, and again, somebody sees us. They see we're not identified, and they start screaming, hey, there was CNN. And then a large group of people come over again and would not get out of our face. One spit on Ike.
Oh, my God.
And that's when our security really got into. They just started pushing people off.
By that point, the night shift at our station had started, which includes myself and my photographer, Van Applegate, who is working on this podcast with me. We met up with our security at Fox 5, and then we drove to Union Station, which is a few blocks from the Capitol, and we set up there.
The woman who was fatally shot inside the Capitol, what can you tell us?
Right, Tisha, I've been talking to that woman's mother-in-law.
Since I was among the first to report on that shooting inside the Capitol, the mother-in-law of Ashley Babbitt, the woman who was shot, called our station. She and her son saw the social media videos where you could clearly see Ashley's face, but she told me that they couldn't get any answers from police or anyone that they were calling about where she was, or even confirmation that it was her that was shot. I checked in with a source of mine and found out what hospital Ashley had been taken to. So her mother-in-law called there, but she was told Ashley wasn't there. It wasn't too long after that we learned Ashley had died. Her mother-in-law obviously was devastated. I talked to her not too long after that news came out. She said that her son didn't come to D.C. with Ashley and that she did not know why her daughter-in-law decided to do this.
Through media reports. Back to you.
Let's get to Fox 5's Josh Rosenthal, who is
closer to the Capitol. Fox 5 reporter Josh Rosenthal was set up. He also works the night shift and was getting in the same time as Van and me.
So, Jim, I'm at 7th and Pennsylvania.
We ended up parking at 9th and Pennsylvania, and we got out of the car, and we just started walking, and we went live, and basically we were walking into a sea of the president's supporters, thousands of them, who were walking in the opposite direction because they were leaving the Capitol as we were walking towards it.
Capitol behind me that you can see lit up. It's about half a mile away. Like you said, Jim, and like I told you about earlier, we have watched people walking away from this area, pouring out of this area.
There were so many people there at the beginning of the day. Some of the people that I spoke with at that point weren't even entirely aware of what had happened in the Capitol. I said, well, what do you think about the violence? And one woman, I remember she was from Long Island, she said, violence? What are you talking about? I don't know.
That same thing happened to me. I was talking to these two ladies and they said, we were just talking about how peaceful this was today. And then I told them that one of these people had been shot and they genuinely did not know because they hadn't been glued to their TV and to social media like we had, and they were completely clueless.
Yeah, I had a number of people say that as well. What a great peaceful protest.
The U.S. Capitol, which is right there behind me. Guys?
In the meantime, hopefully we can take some pictures here out of the District of Columbia where Mayor Bowser is slated.
The mayor of D.C. put a curfew in place for 6 p.m. A few minutes before then, a D.C. police officer I know sent me a photo of officers blocking the Capitol steps, and the text message said, "Took it back." By 6:15, police and the National Guard had established a perimeter. The city was really calming down, at least compared to earlier. Around 8 o'clock, Congress reconvened to certify those electoral votes. By about 9, Fitz was finally able to get out of that room and get out of the Capitol.
It was this odd situation of being there and being at it, but at some point being cut off from it, and then just having to wait. Almost like you were waiting for a wave to crash. You know, it just did not seem possible that the place that I thought was the most secure building in the world could be overrun like that in the way it was. It still, even over a week later, doesn't seem possible.
Jesse and Ike were also headed home.
I was pretty drained. I think more so sad. And I remember coming in at my apartment door and my dog, who has recently gone blind in the past couple months, who can't see anything, obviously. And he was just there so happy to see me. And I was just like, whoa, what a contrast. And all the chaos, and I just come home, he's just ready to... He's ready to play or ready to go outside. And it was such a contrast, and it made me tear up a little bit.
I know that I speak for all of us when I say that we saw an unprecedented attack on our American democracy incited by the United States president, and he must be held accountable.
D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser held a press conference with Police Chief Robert Conti. That was just before 11 o'clock that night. And we realized then this was even worse than we thought.
2 pipe bombs have been recovered. 1 pipe bomb from the DNC, another pipe bomb from the RNC, a cooler from a vehicle with a long gun in it that also included Molotov cocktails. This also was on the grounds of the United States Capitol.
A total of 4 people had died. In addition to Ashley Babbitt, 1 woman and 2 men who came in to protest had medical emergencies. It wasn't until late the next day we learned a Capitol police officer had died after being injured by the mob. 2 days after that, Capitol police officer died by suicide. And then we later learned a D.C. police officer who responded took his life as well. I remember a lot of details about that day, but getting home is a complete blur. The only thing I know is that I just kept scrolling through Twitter like a zombie until like 3 a.m, looking for any updates, new videos, waiting to see if anything else was going to happen. I finally fell asleep not too long before Congress and Vice President Mike Pence finally certified the election for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
The announcement of the state of the vote by the President of the Senate shall be deemed a sufficient declaration of the persons elected President and Vice President of the United States.
On the next episode of Siege on Democracy.
At that point, people were trying to grab my gun, pull my gun out of my holster. People were yelling, chanting, kill him with his own gun.
Police under attack.
One of the insurrectionists was able to get a thumb in my eye and started gouging at it.
Personal accounts of the chaos from 2 D.C. officers. Plus,
what about the video of the Capitol Police opening the gates?
Anything that you see like that, it will be investigated.
The battle at the Capitol left some officers hailed as heroes, but others under investigation.